Hello, comrades, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program, the quest for the final frontier, and we're here in low Kerbin orbit, reliving the dying moments of the previous episode, in which we constructed a space tug to take us all the way out to Duna, and here we are docking the Ike probe, which is the moon of Duna, the only moon of Duna, to our space tug, and in a moment we're going to be ready to cart the whole shebang off into Duna orbit. And Newly Kerbal is in the pilot seat making a few preparations. But yes, our behemoth, our creation, has reached its final build stage, and we're ready to commence with the mission at last. So let's wish Newly Kerbal the best of luck and hope that everything works out in the way that it should, and I certainly hope it will. Let's also hope that we have enough fuel to go there and come back. And well, I'm going to slip into a fast forward sequence in which we start our burn to get into a Duna encounter prior to us getting into orbit. So that's it from me, and I will see you on the other side. Okay, we've completed our burn, and as you can see, we have a Duna encounter. So what we've basically done is align the planets so that when we burn out from Kerbin orbit, we can slingshot all the way around and then arrive at the same place as Duna will be in its orbit, and thus we get captured into its gravity. And upon our arrival at Duna, I had to perform a very long retrograde burn because I was going so fast due to that burn I just did that it took a lot of energy to slow me down for Duna to capture me into an orbit. So in a moment is the footage that I have from that. So yes, sit back and enjoy the Blue Danube Waltz by the great composer Johann Strauss. Okay, comrades, as you saw there, we are now in lunar orbit, and what I did was I dipped down below the area of Juno's atmosphere, so that I could allow myself to be dragged in and slowed down, because I was in quite an elliptical orbit. So if I let the atmosphere slow me down, I could then not waste fuel by having to burn retrograde even more with those nuclear engines. Unfortunately, things didn't quite work out that way, and I didn't really slow down that much. So I thought that, well, instead of just burning, I thought I'd take the opportunity to do some science. So I believe I did a crew report and a temperature scan just then. I can't quite remember. But yes, that was me trying to circularize my lunar orbit. And yeah, this was such a long mission that I had to sort of compress this video quite a lot. So there's going to be a lot of cutting and jumping around. Anyway, coming up now is a section in which we're actually going to detach from our space tug and go over to Ike, which is, of course, half of the mission that we came here to do. So, cutting back, yes, I circularized with the nuclear engines eventually now, and I set Ike as a target. So I don't have much fuel in the space tug, and I don't really know where the fuel has been draining from, because in KSP the fuel actually drains from the tank furthest from the engine that you're burning, so you could end up with an empty tank in the most unexpected place. So I'm just going around checking the fuel levels in the Ike probe tanks, because I'm going to need that to land and get back. And as we undock, the Ike probe is free to roam the lunar system. So I'm just checking on the electric charge, because I'm going to need electric charge to do science if I need to transmit any data, temperature scans and such like. I need quite a lot of that, and these probe bodies do consume quite a lot of electric charge because they have built-in reaction wheels and all that sort of thing. I've also put 2 extra reaction wheels on the actual Ike lander with the probe body on it, so that I have a bit more control over my descent and orientation. But yes, we're backing away with the space tug just so I don't collide with anything when I accelerate. Now, the procedure for going to Ike is exactly the same as the procedure that you need to go to the moon. So I'm just time warping around until Ike rises over the horizon. Now, I had a theory that because Ike was closer, I'd need less fuel to do the transfer, but I think my predictions are right so far. But I don't really want to get too far ahead of myself in case something goes horribly wrong, and there's Ike rising over the horizon right now. So all I have to do now is practically turn and burn, which is more difficult than it sounds when you don't have RCS. But there's the prograde vector. I'm just using the very slight gimbaling on the engines to help me maneuver with the added torque from the reaction wheels. And I'm just slowly throttling it up. I have no indication of how this probe flies, because I didn't have a chance to put it through its paces in low Kerbal orbit. No matter, we are streaking out towards Ike orbit. The burn I don't believe would take very long, because Juno's gravity is quite low and this engine has got quite a high thrust to weight ratio, which is always useful when you're doing small inter-orbital burns. You can see our apoapsis is rising pretty quickly. It will start off slow and then sort of increase its expansion as you go out. And what I did off recording, before I started recording this piece, was I think I changed my inclination of the orbit of the space tug, and yes, I think I did, to match the inclination of Ike. It's slightly off center relative to Duna's equator, which is a tiny bit inconvenient, but it's nothing that can't be got around. And there we are, we have an Ike encounter. We've just lost our periapses, but I don't think I noticed it. But I don't think I actually noticed that at the time, because I wasn't paying attention, which was stupid. And actually, yes, I did notice it because I'm now burning retrograde to bring it back. And periapsis is pretty good. And that's how I can counter, pretty much. Relatively straightforward rendezvous. There were no sort of strings attached. Once again, I'm checking my electric charge. But yes, the mission profile for Ike is basically to do the extent of what we can do with a probe, which is to take a materials bay, do a material study, and do a mystery gear observation and a temperature scan. So that's what we're going to do on the surface, and you can see that we've actually arrived in a very strange orbit. This was rather like the first attempt we had at going to the moon with the Stanislav Mark I lunar exploration spacecraft. We had a trajectory going straight through the moon, which wasn't really ideal, so we had to burn at the planet to bring our periapsis up. And having done just that, we then have to burn retrograde and circularize. It's all a very simple transfer, really. It's one of the least complicated and convoluted transfers that I've done, and I'm quite happy for it, because it's just made this mission a whole lot easier, which is a good thing because we haven't actually got to the business end of the mission, which is of course to land on Duna with the Duna lander, and we're going to be able to do some more extensive research on the surface because we have a Kerbal and he can take surface samples and do EVA reports and crew reports and all that sort of thing, which is much more effective than a single space probe. But I thought while we were here we could just sort of bag some extra science on the surface of Ike. I mean, we've come all this way, it's only logical. So yes, I've reached my periapsis and I'm just slowly burning retrograde on half throttle. You can see there that Ike's gravity seems to be quite low. Always useful when you don't really know what you're doing. Actually, I was flying completely by the seat of my pants. I hadn't read any tutorials on how to get to Ike or anything. I hadn't been on the forums. This was actually the first time I tried it, and luckily it seemed to work out properly, which is good, as I've said about 5 times. Anyway, yes, I've circularized. I've plonked the probe in a really low orbit so that we don't have to waste much more fuel deorbiting and then doing our landing maneuver. I have to say, Ike does look quite barren from this angle. I don't know if that's because the terrain scatter has kicked in yet, so that's all the rocks and the debris that's scattered along the surface. But I guess when we finally do get down there, things will become a lot clearer. I think now is the time to do our deorbit burn. Ike, I believe, is tidally locked to Duna, which means that one side is constantly dark and the other side is obviously constantly light. and here I am just circularizing, just to even things out a bit. My orbit looks pretty good. I'm not going to worry too much about the whole inclination issue at the moment. I can worry about that later when I actually have to take off, because it doesn't really matter where I land at the moment, as long as it's vaguely on the light side and near the equator. I can make adjustments as I take off, which is the useful thing in Kerbal Space Program. A wonderful panoramic shot of Duna in the background. I think I'm going to start my deorbit burn now. And you saw the actual inclination of the scenic mode as I rushed up towards the polar bike, and I'm starting to burn in retrograde. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, comment, subscribe. If you did, it only takes half a second. Support is much appreciated, and I will see you next time.